In part 1 we looked at fault finding the recording film forwarding drive on the Rolls machine, having had a request from a viewer who was having trouble with their own machine. I'll put a link to that video in the description. In this video we'll continue this process and dismantle the stepper motor that moves the film. So next we come to the tricky bit, the stepper motor itself. When I first got my machine, it partially worked. It would advance the film for about half a revolution and then it would stop. Turning the wheel by hand, you could feel something catching for about half of the revolution. I know now that this was due to the ring magnet that's attached behind this plastic wheel was partially falling off. Anyway, after a few more turns, suddenly the wheel went really free, and that was because the ring magnet had completely fallen off and now the motor didn't work at all, so I had to take it all apart. So before doing any work on the stepper motor, I suggest getting a permanent marker of some form, whether that's a Sharpie or something like that, but a fine permanent marker, because you're going to need to put a few alignment marks on things before you take it apart. Otherwise you'll be having to do it by guesswork, which is what I had to do, but I know better now. Technically, you don't need to take the springy brass plate off to remove the motor wheel, but I think I would, because it just makes it a bit easier to handle. The first thing to do is to remove the ball bearing, because otherwise that's going to go rolling round your bench and onto the floor and you'll spend an hour looking for it. Been there, done that. So if you just pull the springy brass bit back a bit and give the ball a prod and have a cup beneath ready for it to fall into. Okay, it's stuck to my screwdriver anyway because it's magnetic, but that's the ball out and safe. So I'll put that out of the way so I don't lose it. And next there's a circlip here to come off, and you just want to prise that off with a screwdriver. It's going to be a little tricky to do without masking your view, but yeah, there it is, off. So circlip off. And then there's a little nylon washer as well, and that's off. And then the springy brass plate, and then another bigger metal washer. So remember the order, metal washer goes back on first, then the springy brass plate, then the nylon washer, and then the circlip. So now we're looking from inside the machine, and this is the forwarding motor wheel here. There's this plate that works the automatic guillotine on the bridge of the machine. Not all models of the Rolls had this, so it's not necessarily going to be there on all machines. But this simply lifts out of place, but have a little look at how it fits first and maybe take a photograph of it before you take it out. But it literally just lifts out like that, because that needs to be out of the way. And now you want to look at the two grub screws in this gear down here. So you'll see there's one grub screw and a second grub screw, and they will have some thread lock or anti-rattle compound on them, which you may need to scrape off before you can move them. So the first thing to do is to pick one of the two screws, so I'll go for this one here, and just check that it's not loose, which it isn't, so that's fine. And now go to the other screw and slacken that one off, like that. So it only needs a quarter turn, that'll be fine. And now wind it back to the first screw, but don't do anything yet. Just leave it so you'll be able to get the screwdriver onto the first screw. But now we're going to make a few marks. So I want to draw a line between the metal gear here and the nylon gear behind it, so I can line those up again after I've done this. So with a bit of luck, that should do the trick. And again, I also want to put an alignment mark on the static electromagnets of the motor and the plastic wheel. So I should more or less get those lined up as well. And that will help with putting it back together in a bit. So now we can undo the second screw. Like that. Again, quarter of a turn will do. And that should now be loose. So now you can't actually take this gear off that way because the mechanism for the automatic guillotine is in the way, but you can pull the motor shaft out. But be aware there is a thrust washer behind this gear here which is going to probably fall down into the machine. You want to keep hold of that. And then there's another one on the other end at the back of the plastic wheel which again might either stay stuck to the motor or might stay actually in the plastic wheel, but both of those you need for reassembly. So if I now carefully withdraw the motor wheel, like so, and you'll see that the gear has now dropped down a little bit, and then if I get in there, my hand's going to be in the way of the camera, sorry, but get in there, get that gear out, and yeah, so the thrust washer has sort of stayed in place here, but now it's dropped down inside, so I'll get my tweezers and get that out. And now back to the other side of the machine. You can see the plastic wheel with the ring magnet on the inside, and these are the static poles of the electromagnets. And I was mistaken, there's actually 3 washers on this end of the shaft against the plastic wheel. So you've got a nylon washer and a couple of brass washers, and this might vary between machines because it would have been fine-tuned to get the backlash on the wheel or the slop on the wheel correct. Anyway, I'll take those off because otherwise I'll drop them a bit later and lose them. And technically the brass washers are actually shims, but washers, shims, it's all the same really. And at this stage, if your magnet hasn't actually fallen off the plastic wheel, which is what had happened with mine, put yourself an alignment mark with your pen from the plastic onto the magnet, because if it does fall off in the future, you'll be really glad you did that. And just as a side thought, I've just popped the shims and washers back onto the motor wheel, and then I'll pop it back onto the machine. And it actually feels notchy even without the gearing and the rest of the stuff attached, because it's the multiple poles passing over the static poles of the electromagnet. The static poles still retain some magnetism, so you get the magnetic fields that the multiple north and south of the ring magnet pass over, and it actually is still notchy. When I first took my stepper motor apart, the ring magnet had completely fallen off, and it needs to be correctly aligned with the dots on the other side of the wheel and also centred correctly. There was a tiny red blob of paint visible on the magnet and a corresponding splodge of red on the actual plastic on the inside of the wheel, so I suspected that might have been an original alignment mark for the magnet, so that was what I aimed for with my alignment, but it still took me 2 goes to actually get it just right. To centre it up correctly, I found something that would fit between the magnet and the outer of the wheel, just the right size so it would fit all round to check it was centred. And it actually turned out that the tube from a WD-40 container worked just right for my job. Once I'd worked out how I was going to align and centre the magnet, I very carefully cleaned off any traces of the old glue from the magnet and the plastic of the wheel, and then I selected my glue to glue it. For my glue, I chose Yoo-Hoo. It's a sort of general purpose stick anything glue. I didn't want anything too strong, certainly not super glue or anything like that, because I had a pretty good feeling that I'd need to remove the magnet and try again, and I was right. So anyway, I carefully spread a bit of glue, not too much, on the back of the magnet, placed it onto my alignment mark as best as I could, used my WD-40 tube to make sure it was centred all round, and then left it overnight to set. The next morning, once the glue had set, I put the shims and washers back onto the motor shaft and reinserted the motor into the housing. I then proceeded to reassemble the machine, finishing off putting the parts for the springy brass plate back on. So you'd got the metal washer, then the brass plate itself, and then the nylon washer, and finishing up with the circlip. Once the springy brass plate was back in place, and before I'd fitted the ball bearing, I noticed that the alignment wasn't quite correct. The hole in the brass plate should be over one of the holes in the wheel. The ball bearing's only there to really coax the wheel one way or another to affect which way it rotates. But it was about a third out, a third of the distance between two of the holes in the wheel. It should be sitting, yeah, about directly lined up like that rather than like that. So I took the wheel off again. By this stage I realised you didn't need to remove the brass springy plate, so I left that in place. And took the washers and shims off again so I didn't lose them. And then I put a mark between the magnet and the wheel to show the current alignment, and then another little mark in the correct direction where I wanted it to be aligned once I'd unglued it. I then used a scalpel to carefully remove any glue that I could from the edge before, with a very fine screwdriver, very carefully just easing the magnet off the glue, because if you break that magnet, I think that's it. I don't think you'll find another of those anywhere, so you kind of don't want to break those magnets. I then cleaned any residue of glue off, reapplied some fresh glue, aligned it with my new alignment mark, left it to set, and this time it was perfect. The alignment was spot on. So now, before I reassemble the machine again, I'm quite interested to see if we can see what the magnetic field's like of the ring magnet. So I've put a bit of paper on top and I'm going to sprinkle on some iron filings and see if it shows us anything. And if it doesn't, you'll never see this clip. Oh yeah, that is working just a bit. Hang on, let me tap it a bit. Okay, that's sort of working. You can see how the filings are gathering on the multiple poles of the magnet. Excellent, that's worked quite well. I've no idea now how I'm going to get that off without getting it stuck all over the magnet, but yeah, it was a good experiment anyway. So now that the ring magnet is fitted and aligned correctly, we can actually put the machine back together properly. So first off, we'll pop the shims and washer back onto the motor shaft like that. And then a good measure would be to put a little bit of oil on the shaft, not a lot, just a little drop, just so it's lubricated. So fine oiler, there we go, teeny bit of oil on the shaft. And now insert the motor wheel back into the housing, like so. Realign the springy brass plate on the little pin here so the actual mechanism is working properly there. And then locate the ball bearing, and this is where you don't want the ball bearing to go pinging around your workbench, so my screwdriver is slightly magnetic so that holds it. And then just peel back the brass plate a little bit, get the ball bearing underneath and clipped in place like that. And so now to the inside of the machine, we'll get the nylon thrust washer from the gear and put that onto the motor shaft there. And now we'll get the gear ready, and remember where its alignment mark is that we need to align up with the nylon gear back here. And if we now pull the motor wheel back out enough so you can actually get the gear past the mechanism for the automatic rewind device, automatic guillotine device, sorry. And then let's have a look, see if I'm lined up on my marks or not. I just need to relocate for a second. I think I'm one notch out there, so spot on. So now we've got the alignment mark lined up with the nylon gear, and the metal gear is still loose on the shaft, so we now turn the motor wheel until the alignment mark we put on earlier is in alignment. So now everything should be, more or less, in the correct place. So now we can do up the motor screws, or the gear screws. First one second one, and these need to be sort of tight enough to nip it to the shaft, but you don't want to strip the screw or anything, because then you'll be in real trouble, and I'd rather the screws came loose than I stripped them. So that should do the trick. And also at this stage I'll realign the springy brass plate onto its pin on the other side, because that came off when I pulled the motor shaft out just now, so that's done. And then I need to find the plate that does the automatic guillotine device, and that the bottom part of it goes underneath the plate here on the machine, and then you just tilt it. This brass lever hooks inside it, and there's a little pin, a nylon pin at the top that goes into a groove, and it just slides backwards and forwards like that, so that is back in the right place. Actually, it wasn't quite in the right place. If you look at the back left corner of the plate, it's sitting up at an odd angle. It should be flat, like in this second picture, and the nylon pin that sticks through that little slot on the top face should be pretty much flush with the top of the plate. So now the moment of truth. Before I actually finish putting it together, I'll put the power on and let's see if it works. Brilliant, that's running forwards at the moment, and if I put it into rewind, it goes backwards, and it's going forwards, and it goes backwards. That seems to be fine. Excellent, now I can finish putting it together and that'll be job done. So with the machine back together, I think it's time for a short demonstration. I'll put a link in the description to my previous video where I do a full demo of the machine. Anyway, I'll put the microphone into the speak or record position. The Rolls is a pretty amazing machine, but I suspect it was temperamental even when it was new, and with everything a bit worn and old on these machines, it's no wonder they can play up a bit nowadays. So I shall rewind that and put it onto play. The Rolls is a pretty amazing machine, but I suspect it was temperamental even when it was new, and with everything a bit worn and old on these machines, it's no wonder they can play up a bit nowadays. Excellent, that seems to be working fine, and we may as well do the old party piece again of using the guillotine. And there you have one piece of recording film. This video has gone on far longer than planned. If you've made it to the end, well done for persevering. There'll be more of my normal vintage stuff and repairs coming soon. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a future video.